Welcome to History's Greatest Battles, Season 1, Episode 2, The Battle of Thymbra.
In 612 BC, the once mighty Assyrian Empire, whose reign of dominance and terror had extended from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean since the mid-8th century BC, was brought to its knees. In that pivotal year, the subjugated Babylonians and Medes united their forces, successfully capturing the Assyrian capital of Nineveh. Following this decisive victory, the fallen empire was partitioned between the conquerors. Nabopolassar of Babylon assumed control over the southern regions, while Cyrus of Media claimed dominion over the north. The region of Media, originally encompassing northwestern Iran along the southern Caspian Sea and extending into Armenia, became the nucleus of Cyrus' expanding influence. Under the leadership of Cyrus, the power of Media expanded westward to the borders of Asia Minor and eastward nearly to the confines of Afghanistan. Cyrus passed away in 585 BC, the same year in which he and the kingdom of Lydia in Asia Minor established the Halys River as the boundary between their realms. Cyrus was succeeded by Astyages, a ruler reputed for his tyranny, who estranged the Median aristocracy through his reliance on religious advisors for policymaking. In 580 BC, Astyages' daughter bore a son named Cyrus. According to legend, Astyages dreamt that his grandson would one day overthrow him, prompting him to order the child's death. However, Cyrus was miraculously saved in a manner reminiscent of Moses in Egypt. Regardless of the precise details, Cyrus grew up in Persis, or Persia, a region now located in southwestern Iran near the Persian Gulf. The Greek historian Herodotus records that in 553 BC, Cyrus was approached by Harpagios, a former commander in the Median army, who urged him to initiate a rebellion against Astyages, promising the support of the Median aristocracy. The exact duration of the rebellion is hard to ascertain, as contemporary sources and those shortly thereafter present conflicting accounts, though it likely persisted for 4 years until the battle at Pasargadae, the capital of Persia, where Harpagios defected to Cyrus. By forging alliances with the Scythians and Hyrcanians from the southern Caucasus, Cyrus successfully seized the Median capital of Ecbatana between 550 and 549 BC. Cyrus swiftly earned the trust of the Median aristocracy and nearly all of Astyages' former subjects by meticulously portraying himself as a just and merciful conqueror. Numerous Median military leaders were appointed to high-ranking positions within the Persian army, and as Cyrus solidified his rule, tensions began to simmer on his western frontier. Croesus, the king of Lydia, was the son of Alyattes, who had previously agreed with Cyrus to establish the Halys River as the boundary between Lydia and Media. Croesus had seemingly maintained favorable relations with Astyages and regarded Cyrus's rise with growing apprehension. In response, Croesus began forming alliances with Egypt, Babylon, and even Sparta. Renowned for its formidable cavalry, Lydia, bolstered by additional forces, posed a significant threat to Cyrus's nascent realm. During a visit to Gubaru, the future satrap of Susa in Elam, Cyrus received word that Croesus had crossed the Halys River with his troops into Cappadocia, where he was ravaging the countryside. In response, Cyrus assembled his forces and began a westward march in the spring of 547. His army advanced along the Median-Babylonian frontier, crossed the Tigris River at Arbela, later to become the site of an Alexander the Great victory, secured reinforcements from Armenia and Kurdistan, and descended into the Cappadocian plain in late 547. The opposing armies clashed near the town of Pteria, engaging in a fierce yet inconclusive battle as winter approached. Few details of the battle survive, aside from the fact that it ended without a definitive victor. With the Cappadocian plain depleted of resources due to the Lydian occupation, Croesus deemed it prudent to withdraw to his capital at Sardis. He planned to regroup his forces, bolstered by allied reinforcements during the winter, and resume the campaign in the spring. Upon reaching Sardis, Croesus dismissed his Greek mercenaries and dispatched messages to his allies, outlining his military requirements for the upcoming season's campaign. After the battle, Cyrus convened with his advisors, who offered similar advice to return home for the winter and resume operations in the spring. It was at this juncture that Cyrus first revealed his military strategic brilliance. Confident that Croesus would be unwilling to retain his mercenaries through the winter and that Lydia's allies could not muster reinforcements for several months, Cyrus resolved to pursue Croesus to Sardis. After allowing Croesus ample time to return home and disband his forces, Cyrus initiated a forced march across Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. Although Croesus caught wind of rumors about Cyrus's advance, he dismissed them as implausible. It was only when Persian forces appeared at the gates of Sardis that Croesus finally grasped the gravity of the situation he was in. Contrary to Cyrus's expectations, Croesus succeeded in mustering a considerable army. The exact size of Croesus's army remains uncertain, but it was likely substantially larger than that of the Persians. Xenophon estimated Cyrus's forces at 200,000 men, though the actual number was likely between 20 to 50,000 men per modern-day military historians. The two armies confronted each other on the plain of Thymbra, just outside Sardis, early in 546 BC. Cyrus arranged his forces in a square formation, with cavalry and chariot units positioned on the flanks. The Lydians, adhering to tradition, deployed their forces in long parallel lines. The battle commenced with the Lydian cavalry's attempt to encircle the square formation. As the Lydian cavalry advanced, their flanking units outpaced the center, creating gaps in the Lydian line. It was at this moment that Cyrus unleashed his secret weapon. At Pteria, one of Cyrus's generals had observed that Lydian horses recoiled in fear at the sight of Persian camels used for transport. Cyrus thus organized his pack animals into the first recorded camel corps and sent them into the fray. Overwhelmed by the unfamiliar scent of the camels, the Lydian horses panicked. The Lydian cavalry dismounted and attempted to fight on foot, but their cumbersome lances proved ineffective while not being on their mounts. Within Cyrus's square formation, Persian archers unleashed volley after volley of arrows into the disordered Lydian ranks. Cyrus's infantry and chariots on the flanks charged into the dismounted Lydian cavalry, and with the flanks now wide open, Cyrus ordered his cavalry to exploit the gaps in the Lydian line. The battle ended in a rout, with the surviving Lydians fleeing towards the walls of Sardis. The Persian forces promptly encircled Sardis, laying siege to the city for 14 days. Upon discovering a potential weakness in the city's defenses where the walls met a cliff, Cyrus dispatched a small force, perhaps the first version of Spec Ops, to scale the hill and breach the walls overlooking the citadel. His troops swiftly captured the stronghold and even captured Croesus himself. The next morning, the city of Sardis opened its gates to Cyrus. From that moment, Lydia ceased to exist as an independent kingdom. Although Cyrus's triumph over Croesus occurred in 546 BC, 7 years before his conquest of Babylon, the victory at Thymbra was the decisive turning point in his campaign to establish the Persian Empire. Babylon, as the co-inheritor of the Assyrian Empire, emerged as a natural rival, despite having done little to directly provoke Cyrus. The Babylonian king Nabonidus was embroiled in a crisis within his own kingdom. Though Nabonidus was committed to sustaining the lucrative trade routes between the Persian Gulf and the Mediterranean, his actions on religious matters incited unrest amongst his people. Ascending to power from a military background rather than through royal lineage, Nabonidus lacked the traditional legitimacy of a hereditary monarch. Consequently, he harbored distrust toward the established Babylonian elite. Nabonidus favored the worship of Sin, the moon goddess, over Marduk, the national deity of Babylon. He further alienated his subjects by erecting temples to Sin in Babylon, a direct affront to the traditional worship of Marduk. Prompted by a dream, Nabonidus led his army to Haran to reestablish the temple of Sin. He subsequently spent 7 years campaigning in Arabia, extending his control as far as Yathrib, or Medina. Nabonidus established a series of colonies along Arabian oases, though it remains uncertain whether his motives were primarily military or commercial. This prolonged expedition further alienated the Babylonians, as the king was expected to attend the annual New Year's festivals, which Nabonidus missed for 7 consecutive years. During Nabonidus' absence, his son and regent, Belshazzar, managed the affairs of the kingdom. When Cyrus, having extended his conquest as far east as Bactria, which is in modern-day Afghanistan, turned his sights on Babylon, Nabonidus belatedly attempted to placate his subjects and prepare for the defense of his realm. In an effort to fortify Babylon's spiritual defenses, Nabonidus summoned all the idols of Marduk to be gathered in the city. However, his efforts appeared to come too late. Cyrus, having possibly communicated with Babylon's religious leaders and assuring them of his tolerance, subtly incited resistance against Nabonidus from within. The fall of Babylon to Cyrus is recounted in 2 markedly different versions. In September 539 BC, Cyrus and his forces defeated the Babylonians at Opis, the former capital of Akkad, which he then destroyed. On October 10th, the town of Sippar capitulated without resistance. Upon hearing this news, Nabonidus fled from Babylon. Ugbaru, one of Nabonidus' former governors, now allied with Cyrus, and governor of Gutium, which is east of the Tigris, entered Babylon unopposed. On October 29th, Cyrus entered Babylon to a triumphant welcome, hailed by the populace as the emissary of the god Marduk, liberating the city from the heretical Nabonidus. The alternative account describes a 2-year siege, from 539 to 538 BC. In this version, as narrated by Herodotus, Cyrus nearly abandoned the siege, as Babylon's inhabitants had stockpiled an enormous cache of supplies. Instead, Cyrus resolved, or was advised, to divert the course of the Euphrates River, which ran through the heart of Babylon. By rerouting the river into a marshland, Cyrus lowered the water level sufficiently for his troops to wade through and infiltrate Babylon via the floodgates. Quote, "The Babylonians themselves claimed that due to the vast size of the city, the outskirts were seized without the central inhabitants being aware. A festival was underway, and the people continued their revelry, oblivious to the invasion until it was too late," unquote. That's Herodotus' account. The capture of Babylon signified the reunification of the ancient Assyrian Empire, now greatly expanded under Cyrus, to encompass Asia Minor and the Persian Gulf coast, stretching nearly to India. Having established the Persian Empire, Cyrus continued his campaigns until, at the age of 70, he met his end in battle against the Scythians near the Jahartis River. However, it was Cyrus's campaign against Lydia which severed Babylon from a potent ally and secured his western frontier that ultimately positioned him to ascend as emperor. Quote, Once Lydia had been overthrown, the balance of power and the interests of Babylonia and Iran, Persia, were in conflict, unquote. A confrontation between the two powers became inevitable, and Nabonidus proved no match for Cyrus. The Persian Empire emerged as the first true world empire in history. Prior to this, large-scale conquests like those of the Assyrians had created empires in size, but lacked cohesive administrative structures. Cyrus was the pioneer of an organized imperial administration. Through policies of religious tolerance, the maintenance of peace, and the enhancement of roadways to boost trade, the Persians built upon Cyrus's legacy, further expanding their empire into Egypt and southeastern Europe, though their advance was eventually halted by the Greeks at Marathon and Salamis in the early 5th century BC. Cyrus was revered by his subjects, not due to demands of divine reverence like a pharaoh, but because, per contemporary sources, he genuinely earned their adoration. His emancipation of the Jews, who had endured decades of Babylonian captivity, reestablished a Jewish homeland, which persisted until the Romans dispersed them once more in the 1st century AD. Though the Jews regarded Cyrus as a divinely appointed deliverer akin to the Babylonians' reverence, his restoration of the Jewish homeland on the eastern Mediterranean coast was also strategically motivated, providing a loyal population to serve as a buffer against an expanding Egypt. To many, Cyrus represented a welcome departure from the absolute brutal tyranny of the Assyrians, the last major conquerors in the region. Through his compassionate approach, Cyrus quickly garnered support where the Assyrians had sown only discontent and hatred. Unlike the Assyrian Empire, which was toppled by rebellion, the Persian Empire endured for over 2 centuries, succumbing only with the arrival of Alexander the Great.